The red pen had not moved from the windowsill in 17 years. Edith's fingers found it in the dark, the same way they always did when the pain woke her. 2:43 in the morning. The apartment was cold enough that her breath made ghosts on the air. She held the pen against her chest, the metal clip pressed to her collarbone, and listened to her husband breathe. William breathed in a rhythm she had memorized over 53 years. A small catch at the end of each exhale, like a man still surprised to find himself alive each morning. He was 80 years old. He had been a high school principal for 31 years. He had never once raised his voice in their marriage. He had signed a document in 1997 that their daughter used to take their house, and he had not told Edith about it until the locks were already changed. The red pen was a Parker jotter. Stainless steel barrel made in England 1994. Edith had used it to mark her last exam paper on June 15, 2007, a senior thesis on Jane Austen's treatment of property law and Pride and Prejudice. The student had written that marriage was the only avenue of financial security available to women in Regency England, and Edith had written in the margin, in red ink that had since faded to the color of dried blood, "Some things do not change as much as we imagine." She had not graded a paper since. She had kept the pen. The windowsill faced east. Edith watched the sky turn from black to the color of an old bruise, then to something that approximated dawn. She counted the cars on the street below. 17. None of them stopped. None of them ever stopped. At 7 o'clock, William woke. He reached for her hand before he opened his eyes. His fingers found hers, cold from the pen she still held. "Same dream," he said. "Tell me." "I was unlocking the front door, the old one. The key fit." Edith did not say what she was thinking. She set the pen on the windowsill and stood, her knees reporting the cost of another night on a twin mattress they had bought at a thrift store because their daughter had kept the queen bed, too. The apartment had one bedroom, one bathroom, a kitchen that was 3 feet wide, and a radiator that made noise but not heat. The rent was $1,400 a month. Their combined Social Security was $2,800. The math required that they not eat lunch. "I'll make coffee," Edith said. "We're out. Then I'll make water." William smiled. It was the same smile he had given her in 1971, when she was 25 and he was 28, and they had stood in the living room of their first house, a 2-bedroom colonial with a cracked driveway and a maple tree that dropped helicopters every spring. And he had said, "I don't know how to be a husband." She had said, "Neither do I. We'll figure it out." They had figured it out. They had raised a daughter. They had paid a mortgage for 30 years. They had planted a garden every spring and harvested tomatoes every fall and painted the kitchen twice, once yellow, once a green that William said reminded him of the sea, even though he had only seen the sea once in 1985 on their 20th anniversary trip to Cape Cod. They had believed that if you did the right things for long enough, the world would eventually do right by you. They had believed wrong. The house was a Victorian on Elm Street, built in 1892. 3 stories, a wraparound porch, a turret that Edith had used as a reading nook, and a basement that flooded every spring when the snow melted. They had bought it in 1973 for $37,000. They had raised their daughter in it. They had paid off the mortgage in 2003 with a ceremony that involved burning the final statement in the fireplace while drinking champagne that William had hidden in the garage for 10 years. Their daughter, Claire, was born in 1974. She was a colicky infant who became a difficult child, who became an adolescent who slammed doors and wept and accused her parents of ruining her life. She had been suspended from high school twice, once for drinking, once for fighting. William had been the principal of a different school 5 towns over. When Claire was suspended, he had not used his position to intervene. He had let her face the consequences. Edith remembered this. She remembered sitting in the living room the night Claire was suspended the second time, watching her husband stare at the wall, his hands folded in his lap, his face a mask of the kind of grief that does not produce tears. "Did I do this to her?" he had asked. "No. Then why is she so angry?" Edith had not had an answer. She did not have one now. Claire had married a man named Paul in 2001. Paul was a real estate developer who wore suits that cost more than Edith's entire wardrobe and drove a black SUV with leather seats that smelled like money. He had built a house for Claire on the outskirts of town, 4,000 square feet, a pool, a 3-car garage, and Claire had stopped calling. The calls became texts. The texts became emails. The emails became silence. Then, in 2015, the emails stopped too. Edith had sent a birthday card every year. She had never received a thank you. She had sent Christmas presents. She had never received acknowledgement. She had called every Mother's Day and left voicemails that Claire did not return. In 2022, the voicemails stopped being unanswered. They started being rejected. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in October. Edith found it in the mailbox of the apartment, wedged between a flyer for a new pizza place and a postcard from a dentist's office. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, and bore the return address of a law firm she had never heard of, Harrison, Mills & Chen, attorneys at law, 47 Main Street, Suite 300. She opened it standing in the hallway. The radiator hissed. The light flickered. The letter was 3 pages long. It was written in language so precise and so cold that Edith had to read it 3 times before she understood what it meant. Claire was evicting them. The house on Elm Street, the house Edith had lived in for 50 years, the house she had painted and repaired and loved, was not theirs. It had never been theirs, according to the letter. In 1997, William had signed a document transferring the house into a family trust. The trust named Claire as the sole beneficiary upon the death of both parents. But the trust also contained a clause that allowed Claire to take possession of the property if she could demonstrate that the parents were unable to maintain the residence in a condition consistent with its value. The letter stated that Claire had documented 37 violations of the town's housing code. The porch railing was loose. The paint was peeling. The roof had a leak that Edith had patched with tar 2 years ago. Claire had photographs. Claire had dates. Claire had a lawyer. The letter gave them 30 days to vacate. Edith sat down on the floor of the hallway. The carpet was thin and smelled like the previous tenant's cat. She held the letter in both hands and stared at the signature at the bottom, a name she did not recognize, printed in type so small she had to squint. She did not cry. She had stopped crying 3 years ago when Claire had changed her phone number without telling her. She waited until William came home from his walk. He walked every morning to the park, where he sat on a bench and watched the children play, because he had nowhere else to go, and she handed him the letter. He read it in the kitchen. His hands did not shake. His face did not change. "I signed something," he said. "In 1997, I don't remember what it said. You didn't read it. Why?" He set the letter down. He looked at her, and she saw something in his eyes that she had never seen before. It was not shame. It was not regret. It was something older and more tired. "Because I trusted her," he said. The moving trucks came on November 15. Edith packed the boxes herself. William offered to help, but his hands trembled when he tried to fold the tape, so she told him to sit on the porch and watch the street. She packed their clothes, 2 suitcases each, everything they owned. She packed the kitchen, the pots she had used for 50 years, the spatula with the cracked handle, the coffee mugs that had been her mother's. She packed the photographs. Claire as a baby, Claire at her wedding, Claire in a Halloween costume when she was 6, dressed as a princess, smiling. She did not pack the red pen. She set it on the windowsill of the empty living room. The house was hollow now, the walls bare, the floors scuffed where furniture had been. She stood in the room where she had read to Claire every night for 12 years, where she had argued with William about money and laughed with him about nothing, and watched the snow fall through the bay window every winter for half a century. The pen sat on the sill. The afternoon light caught the steel. Edith picked it up. She put it in her pocket. She walked out the front door and did not look back. The lawyer's office was on the 2nd floor of a building downtown, above a bakery that smelled like butter and sugar. Edith had not eaten breakfast. She had not eaten dinner the night before. The smell made her stomach clench. The lawyer was a woman named Sarah Chen, 44 years old, with gray-streaked hair and glasses that hung from a chain around her neck. She had agreed to meet them pro bono after Edith had called 17 law firms and 17 receptionists had said they did not handle trust disputes. Sarah Chen had said yes on the 18th call. "I read the trust document," she said. She sat behind a desk that was too clean, no papers, no photographs, only a laptop and a cup of pens. "It's valid. It was notarized. Your signature is on it." William sat in the chair beside Edith. He had not spoken since they entered the building. "But there's something wrong with it," Sarah said. Edith leaned forward. "The trust was established in 1997. Your daughter was 23. She was not a trustee. She was a beneficiary. The trustee was a man named Robert Harrison." "Do you know him?" "No," Edith said. "He was your daughter's attorney. He drafted the trust. He died in 2018. But before he died, he sent a letter to your daughter, which was discovered during discovery in another case. That letter suggests that your daughter knew the trust was not intended to allow her to evict you. It was intended to avoid probate after your death. But the document says what it says. But the letter is evidence of intent. And in trust law, intent matters. Edith's hands were cold. She put them under her thighs. "We have a problem, though," Sarah said. "The letter is circumstantial. It's not enough on its own to overturn the trust. We need something that demonstrates that both you and your husband understood the house to be your property, independent of the trust. Something that predates 1997. Edith thought about the house. She thought about the deed, the mortgage, the insurance policies. She thought about the will they had written in 1995, leaving everything to Claire. But that will was gone. Claire had taken it. There's something else, Sarah said. Your daughter is claiming that you abandoned the property voluntarily. She's saying that you moved out because you wanted to and that the eviction notice was a formality. That's a lie, I know. But she has evidence. She has emails from you thanking her for helping you find the apartment. Edith stared at her. I never sent those emails. She says you did. She forwarded them to the court. Edith's throat was tight. She thought about the letters she had written, the birthday cards, the Christmas presents, the voicemails that went unanswered. She thought about the way Claire had stopped returning calls, the way the distance had grown from silence into something more deliberate. She's been planning this, Edith said. For years. Sarah did not disagree. The apartment became a cell. Edith measured her days in the number of steps she could take before her knees gave out. 7 steps from the bed to the bathroom, 12 steps from the bathroom to the kitchen. 23 steps if she walked the perimeter of the living room, which was not a living room, but a space that contained a couch, a lamp, and a television that they did not use because the cable had been disconnected. She woke at 5:30 every morning before the sun. She made a cup of tea from a bag she had already used twice. She sat by the window and watched the street. The street was named Maple Avenue, but there were no maples. There was a gas station, a laundromat, and a building that had been a restaurant until someone had painted the windows white and left the sign hanging crooked. At 7, William woke. They ate breakfast in silence. Crackers, canned soup, bread that Edith bought day-old from the supermarket, half price. At 9, William walked to the park. He sat on the bench and watched the children play. He did not talk to anyone. He had not had a conversation longer than 5 minutes since they left the house. At noon, he came back. They ate lunch. More crackers, more soup. At 2, Edith wrote letters. She had been writing letters since she was a girl. She wrote to her sister, who lived in Florida and called once a month. She wrote to her former students, the ones whose addresses she still had. She wrote to the editor of the local newspaper, even though they never published her letters. She wrote to Claire. She wrote every day in a notebook she had bought at the drugstore for $3. She wrote about the weather. She wrote about the birds she saw from the window, sparrows, mostly in a single crow that came every afternoon to sit on the telephone wire. She wrote about the dreams she had, the ones where she was still in the house on Elm Street, walking from room to room, opening closets and finding them full of things she had forgotten. She wrote about William, how he had stopped talking. How he sat in his chair for hours, staring at a wall that had nothing on it. She did not send the letters. There was no address to send them to. The key was in a box under the bed, William's master key, a Schlage brass, worn smooth by decades of use. He had carried it for 31 years, from 1976 to 2007, through hallways that smelled of floor wax and teenage sweat, through classrooms where he had stood at the front and tried to teach children who did not want to learn. The school had been demolished in 2010. The key had no locks left to open, but William kept it. He took it out every night after Edith fell asleep and held it in his hand, the weight of it, the shape, the way the brass had worn down where his thumb had pressed against it, day after day, year after year. He had unlocked doors with that key. He had locked them. He had opened the building every morning at 6:30 and closed it every night at 8, walking the empty halls, checking that every classroom was dark, every window locked, every student gone. He had been good at his job. Not because he was strict, but because he was patient. He had listened to students who had no one else to listen to them. He had suspended kids when they deserved it, but he had always called them back the next day to talk. The demolition had been on a Friday. He had driven past the school on Saturday morning, on his way to the grocery store, and found nothing but a pile of rubble. The walls he had walked through, the floorboards he had polished. The office where he had kept a photograph of Edith and Claire, the one where Claire was 7 and missing a front tooth and laughing. He had not cried. He had driven home and told Edith that the school was gone. She had touched his face. She had not said anything. The key was all that was left. December came with a cold that seeped through the walls. The radiator caught steam that smelled like rust. The windows fogged with condensation. Edith wore 2 sweaters and a coat indoors, and still she shivered. She had stopped writing letters. Her hands were too cold to hold the pen. She had stopped eating lunch. The crackers were gone, and the bread was gone, and the soup was gone, She had $70 left until the first of the month. She sat in the window and watched the crow. It came every day at 2, landing on the telephone wire, tilting its head as if asking a question. "I don't know," Edith said aloud. The crow tilted its head the other way. William came back from his walk earlier than usual. His face was gray, his lips cracked. He sat down in his chair and did not take off his coat. "The park is empty," he said. "It's December. There was a woman. She was feeding the birds." She looked at me and left. Edith did not ask what that meant. She knew what it meant. They had become invisible. The kind of old people that others looked through, not at. The kind that made people uncomfortable because they were a reminder of where everyone was going. "I have an idea," she said. William looked at her. "We could sell the pen." He blinked. "The red pen," she said. "It's a Parker Jotter. People collect them. It might be worth something. It's your pen. It's a thing. We need money." William shook his head. "No, William, no." He said it with a finality she had not heard from him in years. The voice of the principal, the voice he had used to end arguments, to close doors, to say, "This is how it is." She did not argue. The envelope arrived on a Friday, 3 weeks before Christmas. It was addressed to William. The return address was a law firm, but not the one they had been dealing with. This one was in Boston. The paper was heavy, the letterhead embossed, the signature at the bottom written in ink so blue it looked liquid. William opened it at the kitchen table. Edith watched his face. He read the letter once. He read it again. "Who is it?" "Edith Adge." "A judge?" He handed her the letter. She read it standing in the kitchen, the fluorescent light flickering overhead. The letter was from the Honorable Margaret Torres, Massachusetts Superior Court. She was writing to inform William that she had been made aware of his situation through a former colleague and that she was offering to review the trust documents pro bono. Her name was familiar. Edith read it again. Margaret Torres. She had taught a Margaret Torres in 1995, 10th grade English. A quiet girl who sat in the back of the classroom and wrote poetry that Edith had kept in a folder for 30 years. A girl who had been shy, who had spoken so softly that the other students had to lean in to hear her. A girl who had written an essay about justice that had made Edith cry. A girl who had said, on the last day of school, "Mrs. Parker, you made me love words." Edith had written her a letter of recommendation for law school. She had not heard from her since. The letter in her hands was dated December 12. It said that Judge Torres would be in the area on December 20 and that she would like to meet with them. December 20 was a Tuesday. Edith wore her best dress, navy blue, polyester, purchased in 2003 for a retirement party she had not wanted to attend. William wore a suit jacket over a sweater because his dress shirts no longer fit. They took the bus downtown. The bus was warm. Edith sat by the window and watched the streets she had known for 50 years slide past. The hardware store where she had bought paint for the porch. The library where she had taken Claire for story time. The bakery where she had bought bread every Saturday morning. The courthouse was a granite building with columns that made Edith feel small. They walked up the steps, through metal detectors, past security guards who looked at them with the particular disinterest reserve old people who were lost. Judge Torres met them in a conference room on the 3rd floor. She was 47 now, her hair gray at the temples, her face lined in ways that suggested she had spent a lot of time being serious. She wore a black robe over a blouse that was the color of cream. She stood when they entered. She shook Edith's hand with both of hers. "Mrs. Parker, Your Honor. Please." "Margaret." They sat. The table was polished wood. Edith could see her reflection in it. "I read the trust document," Margaret said. "I also read the letter from Mr. Harrison, the original trustee. The letter suggests that your daughter was aware that the trust was not intended to allow her to take possession of the property during your lifetimes. But the document says otherwise," William said. "Yes, and in court, the document usually wins. Unless we can show a pattern of behavior that demonstrates your ownership of the property, independent of the trust." "I have letters," Edith said. Margaret looked at her. "I have 30 years of letters," Edith said. "Letters from my students. Letters from my sister. Letters from William when he traveled for work. Letters that have our address on them. Letters that prove we lived there, that we treated it as our home. That's not ownership. No. But some of them are from you." Margaret was very still. "Your letters," Edith said. "From when you were in law school. You wrote to me. You wrote about the cases you were studying. You wrote about property law, and I wrote back." Margaret's face did not change. "I still have them," Edith said. The box was under the bed in the apartment, behind the box with William's key. Edith had not looked at the letters in years. She had kept them because she was a teacher, and teachers keep things, the drawings, the notes, the essays that made them cry. The letters from students who had gone on to become doctors and lawyers and parents and people who forgot to write back. But Margaret Torres had written back. She had written every year for a decade, telling Edith about her life, her career, her marriage. She had written about the cases that kept her awake at night. She had written about the weight of the robe, the way it made her feel like she was wearing someone else's skin. And in one of those letters, sent in 1998, Margaret had asked a question, "Do you and Mr. Parker still live in the house on Elm Street?" Edith had written back, "Yes. We paid off the mortgage in 2003. The house is ours finally." She had written that sentence without thinking. It was just a fact, a simple statement, the kind of thing you say when you are talking to someone who knows you. But the date mattered. The date was 1998, a year after the trust was signed. A year after William had put his name on a document he did not read. A year after Claire had begun the slow, silent work of taking everything. Margaret read the letter in the conference room. Her face was unreadable. She held the paper with both hands, the way you hold something fragile, something that could break. "This is your handwriting," she said. "Yes." "And the postmark is 1998, yes." Margaret set the letter down. She looked at Edith, and her eyes were the same eyes that had looked at her across a classroom 30 years ago, asking a question about Jane Austen, about marriage and property, and the things women had to do to survive. "This letter," Margaret said, "combined with the others you mentioned, and with the postmarks and addresses, could be enough to demonstrate a pattern of ownership. It's not a deed, it's not a contract. But it's evidence that you and your husband treated the house as your own after the trust was created. Is that enough?" Margaret was quiet for a long time. "It might be," she said. "But it depends on the judge. You're a judge. I can't preside over my own case. But you can speak to the court, you can submit an affidavit." Margaret looked at the letter again. She turned it over as if she expected to find something on the back. She set it down. "I will," she said. Edith did not sleep that night. She lay in the dark, listening to William breathe, listening to the radiator hiss, listening to the sound of her own heart beating in her ears. She thought about the letters, the box under the bed, the words she had written without knowing they would matter. She thought about Margaret Torres, the girl who had sat in the back of the classroom, the girl who had loved words, the girl who had become a judge. She thought about Claire. Claire had been 7 years old when Margaret Torres was in Edith's classroom. Claire had been a child who drew pictures of houses, who colored them in with crayons, who asked her mother, "Will I live in a house like this when I grow up?" Edith had said yes. She had said, "You will live in whatever house you want. You will have everything you need." She had not known that Claire would need her house. She had not known that Claire would take it. The hearing was scheduled for January 15. Sarah Chen called with the news. Her voice was careful, measured, the voice of someone who has learned not to hope. "Judge Torres submitted an affidavit," she said. "It's strong. It establishes that you and your husband believed yourselves to be the owners of the property after the trust was signed. That's important. But the trust document is still the trust document. Your daughter's attorney will argue that the trust supersedes any subjective belief. They will argue that your husband signed it and that his signature is binding. He didn't read it. That doesn't matter in court. You're responsible for what you sign." Edith held the phone. She could feel the cold from the window, the draft that came through the frame, the way her fingers had gone numb. "There's something else," Sarah said. "Your daughter has submitted additional evidence. Bank statements, credit card records. She's claiming that you and your husband were financially irresponsible, that you mismanaged the property, that you don't deserve it." Edith closed her eyes. "When is the hearing?" "January 15th, 10 in the morning. We'll be there." January 15 was a Tuesday. It snowed the night before. The streets were white, the sidewalks slick, the air so cold that Edith's breath froze on her scarf. She wore the navy dress. She wore her winter coat, the one with the torn lining. She held William's hand as they walked from the bus stop to the courthouse. The courthouse was the same granite building, the same columns, the same metal detectors. But this time, the hallways were full of people, lawyers in suits, families in coats, a woman with a crying child. Edith found the courtroom on the second floor, room 207. The door was heavy, the wood dark, the handle brass. She pushed it open. The courtroom was small, wooden benches, a raised desk for the judge, a table for the plaintiff and a table for the defendant. Claire was already there. She sat at the plaintiff's table next to a man in an expensive suit. She looked older than Edith remembered. Her hair was shorter, grayer. Her face was harder, the lines around her mouth carved by something that was not age. She did not look at her parents. Edith sat at the defendant's table. William sat beside her, Sarah Chen was already there, a stack of papers in front of her. The judge entered, a man in his 60s with white hair and reading glasses. He sat down, adjusted his robe, and looked at the room. "This is the matter of the Parker Family Trust," he said. "Counsel, please introduce yourselves." The man next to Claire stood. "Your Honor, I am Jeffrey Mills, representing the beneficiary, Claire Whitfield." Sarah stood. "Your Honor, I am Sarah Chen, representing William and Edith Parker." The judge nodded. "I have reviewed the evidence. I have read the affidavits. I have read the trust document. I have read the letters." He paused. "This is an unusual case," he said. "The trust document is valid. It was signed. It was notarized. But the evidence submitted by the respondent suggests that the grantor, Mr. Parker, did not understand the document he was signing. Furthermore, the evidence suggests that the beneficiary, Ms. Whitfield, was aware of this misunderstanding and took steps to exploit it." Claire's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, my client's intent is irrelevant. The document is the document. The law is clear." "The law is never clear," the judge said. "That's why we have judges." He looked at the letters. He held one up. The letter Edith had written to Margaret Torres in 1998, the one that said, "The house is ours, finally." This letter was written after the trust was established. It demonstrates that the respondents believed themselves to be the owners of the property. That belief is consistent with 30 years of behavior, mortgage payments, property taxes, maintenance records. It is inconsistent with the terms of the trust. "The trust is the legal document," Mills said, "and the letter is evidence of intent. In trust law, intent matters." The judge set the letter down. "I am ordering a stay of eviction," he said. "The respondents will be allowed to return to the property pending a full review of the trust's validity. This court will reconvene in 60 days. Edith heard the words, but they'd not land. They floated above her like the snow outside, like something that had not yet touched the ground. She looked at Claire. Claire was staring at the judge. Her face was white. Her hands were on the table, flat, as if she was holding herself in place. She did not look at her mother. She did not look at her father. She stood, gathered her papers, and walked out of the courtroom without saying a word. Edith did not go back to the house that night. She went back to the apartment. She sat in the window. She watched the crow. William sat in his chair. He did not speak. The key was in his hand. The brass was warm. The red pen was on the windowsill. Edith picked it up. She held it in her palm. The steel was cold. The clip was worn. She had used it to mark 1,000 papers, to write 1,000 notes, to sign 1,000 checks. She had used it to write the letters that saved them. She set it back on the windowsill. The crow tilted its head. The house was cold when they returned. The heat had been shut off. The pipes were frozen. The windows were dark. Edith walked through the rooms one by one. The living room empty. The kitchen empty. The bedroom, where the bed was gone, the dresser was gone, the photograph of Claire at 7 years old was gone. She went to the turret, the reading nook. The place where she had sat for 50 years, with a book in her hands, with the sun coming through the window. The windowsill was bare. She had taken the pen. She had left nothing else. She stood in the empty room and listened to the silence. And then she found it. A box pushed into the back of the closet, behind a shelf that had been built into the wall. A box she had forgotten. A box she had not opened in years. She pulled it out. The cardboard was soft, warped by moisture. The tape was yellowed. She opened it. Inside were letters. Dozens of letters, from Margaret Torres, from other students, from her sister. From William, written when he traveled for work, written on hotel stationery, written in his small, careful handwriting. She picked one up. The postmark was 1995, 2 years before the trust. The letter was about a conference he had attended, a speech he had given. At the bottom he had written, "When I get home, let's talk about the house. I want to make sure you're taken care of no matter what happens." She read it again. "I want to make sure you're taken care of." She looked at the date, 1995, 2 years before the trust. 2 years before Claire had taken her father to a lawyer's office. She looked at the address, the house on Elm Street. She looked at the words, "No matter what happens." And she understood. The house had been hers. It had always been hers. The trust was not a mistake. It was a theft. And the letters were the key. Edith sat on the floor of the empty turret. The box was in her lap. The letters were in her hands. The sun was setting. The room was orange. She did not move. She thought about William, sitting in the living room, staring at the wall. She thought about the key in his hand, the one that no longer opened anything. She thought about the red pen on the windowsill, the one she had carried through every room of this house for 17 years. She thought about Claire. Claire was 7 years old again, drawing a picture of a house, coloring in with crayons, asking her mother, Will I live in a house like this when I grow up? Edith had said yes. She had been wrong, but the house was still here. The walls were still standing. The letters were still real. She opened the box again. She pulled out a letter from the bottom. It was from Margaret Torres, dated 2009, the year Margaret had been appointed to the bench. The letter was short, 3 paragraphs. At the end, Margaret had written, "I became a judge because of you. Because you taught me that words matter. That justice is not a document, it is a belief." Edith read it 3 times. She folded the letter. She put it back in the box. She stood up. The sun was gone. The room was dark. She walked to the window. The red pen was not there. She had brought it with her. It was in her pocket. She took it out. She set it on the windowsill. And she waited. She waited until the moon rose. She waited until the light from the window fell across the red pen, turning it black. She waited it until her legs ached and her back stiffened and her breath came slow and steady, the way it did when she was about to do something she had put off for too long. Then she picked up the pen and the box of letters and went downstairs. The kitchen was cold. She had not turned on the heat in this part of the house for years. She set the box on the table and pulled out every letter, every envelope, every scrap of paper. She laid them out in chronological order, a timeline of 50 years spread across the worn wood. She found the deed to the house. It was not in the box. She had kept it in the safe behind the portrait of William's mother, the one Claire had never bothered to open because she thought it was empty. But Edith knew. Edith had always known where things were. She opened the safe. The deed was there. The house was listed in her name, then William's, then hers again, with a handwritten note from the lawyer. Transfer upon death to surviving spouse. No contest clause voided by mutual consent, 1994. She looked at the deed. She looked at the trust document Claire had filed in 1997. She looked at the letters, and she began to write. She wrote to Margaret Torres, not an email, a letter, on paper, with the red pen. "Margaret, I believe I have been the victim of a fraud. The trust you helped me establish in 1997 was based on documents that may have been forged. I have enclosed copies of the original deed and correspondence from my husband that contradict the terms of the trust. I am not asking you to act as my lawyer. I am asking you to act as a judge. I need you to look at what I have found and tell me if I am wrong. If I am not wrong, I need you to tell me what to do. Your old teacher, Edith." She sealed the envelope. She addressed it to the courthouse. She drove to the post office at midnight and dropped it in the slot. Then she went home and sat in the living room and looked at the wall where William used to stare. She did not sleep. 3 days later, Margaret called. "Edith, Margaret, I looked at the documents." And the line was quiet. Edith could hear papers rustling. She could hear Margaret breathing. "You're not wrong," Margaret said. "The trust was filed with a forged signature. Your husband's signature on the 1997 document does not match the signature on the 1995 letter. I had a handwriting analyst look at it. The loops are different. The pressure is different. Someone traced his signature from an older document." Edith closed her eyes. She had known. She had known since she found the letters. But hearing it said aloud, by a judge, by a woman she had taught, by someone who had reason to lie, it was different. "Who?" Margaret asked. "Who do you think?" Another silence, longer this time. "I can't file the motion myself," Margaret said. "Conflict of interest. But I can recommend a lawyer. Someone good. Someone who will take this seriously. Thank you." "Edith?" "Yes? You taught me that justice is not a document. It is a belief. Do you still believe that?" Edith looked at the red pen. It was on the coffee table. She had put it there when she came home. "Yes," she said, "I still believe it." "Good, because you're going to need that belief. This is going to be ugly." The lawyer's name was Daniel Reyes. He was young, he was sharp. He had the kind of eyes that did not miss anything. He came to the house on a Tuesday. He sat in the living room. He read the letters. He read the deed. He read the trust. He read the handwriting analysis Margaret had commissioned. "Mrs. Vance," he said, "this is a very strong case." "It is. But it's also a very old case. The statute of limitations on fraud in this state is 10 years from the date of discovery. When did you discover the fraud?" 3 days ago. He nodded. "That's our argument. You discovered the fraud when you found the letters. We file immediately. We ask for the trust to be invalidated. We ask for the property to be returned. Proper the house, the land, the contents. Everything Claire took." Edith looked at the room. The furniture was old. The walls were faded. The rug was threadbare. Everything? Everything. They filed the motion in March. Claire was served at her office. Edith heard about it from the lawyer. Claire called her that night. "Mother, Claire, you're suing me. I am. You're going to lose. Maybe. You're old. You're alone. You don't have any money. You don't have any power. You don't have anything. I have the letters. The line went quiet. What letters? The letters your father wrote. The letters you didn't find. The letters that prove you forged his signature. That's a lie. Is it? You can't prove anything. I already have. A handwriting analyst has already confirmed the forgery. Margaret Torres has already reviewed the documents. The court will review them too. You're lying. Claire. What? I taught you to read. I taught you to write. I taught you to think. I did not teach you to do this. The line went dead. Edith set the phone down. She did not cry. The hearing was in June. The courtroom was small. The judge was old. The walls were paneled in dark wood. Edith sat at a table with Daniel Reyes. Claire sat at the other table with a lawyer in an expensive suit. She did not look at Edith. She looked at her phone. She looked at the ceiling. She looked anywhere but at her mother. The judge called the case. Daniel spoke first. He laid out the evidence. He showed the letters. He showed the deed. He showed the handwriting analysis. He showed the dates. He showed the timeline. He spoke for 40 minutes. When he was done, the judge looked at Claire's lawyer. Mr. Lindstrom, Your Honor. Your response? The lawyer stood. He adjusted his tie. He cleared his throat. Your Honor, my client acknowledges that the trust was filed in 1997, but she maintains that it was filed in accordance with her father's wishes. The signature may appear inconsistent, but that is due to the passage of time and the deterioration of Mr. Vance's health. There is no evidence of intentional fraud. The judge looked at Edith. Mrs. Vance, do you have anything to add? Edith stood. She was wearing a blue dress. She had bought it 20 years ago. It still fit. Your Honor, she said, I have a letter from my husband, dated 1995, in which he states his intention to ensure that I am taken care of, no matter what happens. I have a letter from my husband, dated 1996, in which he describes his plans for the house after his retirement. I have a letter from my husband, dated 1997, 3 months before the trust was filed, in which he tells me he has scheduled an appointment with a lawyer to update his will. She paused. I have no letter from my husband, dated 1997, in which he mentions a trust, because there is no such letter. Because the trust was created without his knowledge. The judge looked at Claire. Miss Vance, do you have anything to say? Claire stood. She was wearing a gray suit. Her hair was perfect. Her makeup was perfect. Her hands were shaking. Your Honor, my mother is confused. She is old. She is lonely. She is making accusations that have no basis in reality. Then why, the judge said, does the handwriting analysis show a clear discrepancy? Claire's lawyer interrupted. Your Honor, the handwriting analysis is not conclusive. It is an opinion, not a fact. It is a fact, the judge said, that the signature on the 1997 trust document differs significantly from the signature on the 1995 letter. I have reviewed the documents myself. I have seen the difference. He looked at Claire. Miss Vance, I am going to ask you one time. Did you forge your father's signature? Claire stared at him. No. Then how do you explain the discrepancy? I can't. You can't. No. The judge leaned back. He looked at the ceiling. He looked at the documents. He looked at Claire. I am ordering a full forensic examination of the trust document, he said. I am also ordering a review of all financial transactions related to the trust. If there is evidence of fraud, I will refer this case to the district attorney. Claire's face went white. Your Honor, her lawyer said, my client is prepared to settle. Settle? We are prepared to return the house. We are prepared to return the property. We are prepared to pay restitution. The judge looked at Edith. Mrs. Vance? Edith looked at Claire. Claire was crying. Edith had not seen her cry since she was 7 years old. No, Edith said. Mrs. Vance, the judge said, are you sure? I am sure. Then we proceed. The forensic examination took 3 months. It found that the signature on the trust document had been traced from a 1994 letter. It found that the notary's stamp had been forged. It found that the filing date had been altered. The district attorney filed charges. Claire was arrested at her office. She was handcuffed. She was photographed. Her picture was on the news. Edith did not watch. The trial was in November. Claire's lawyer argued that she had been under duress. He argued that her father had been abusive. He argued that she had acted to protect herself. Edith testified. She told the court about William. She told them about the way he sat in the living room and stared at the wall. She told them about the key that did not open anything. She told them about the red pen. She told them about the letters. She told them about the house. She told them about the 7-year-old girl who had drawn a picture of a house and asked if she would live in one like it someday. I said yes, Edith said. I was wrong. But I did not know I was wrong. I trusted my daughter. I trusted her the way a mother trusts a child. And she used that trust to take everything I had. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They found Claire guilty of fraud, forgery, and theft. The judge sentenced her to 5 years in prison and ordered her to pay full restitution. Edith did not stay for the sentencing. She went home. The house was empty. She walked through the rooms. She touched the walls. She opened the windows. She let the air in. She went to the turret. She sat in the reading nook. She looked out the window. The red pen was on the windowsill. She picked it up. She held it in her hand. She thought about Claire. She thought about the 7-year-old girl with the crayons. She thought about the woman in the gray suit, handcuffed, crying. She thought about justice. She had won. She had gotten the house back. She had gotten the trust back. She had gotten the money back. She had gotten everything back. And she was alone. The letter came in December. It was handwritten, on plain paper. No return address. Mother, I am not writing to apologize. An apology would not mean anything. I am writing to tell you that I understand now. I understand what I did. I understand why I did it. I understand that I was wrong. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't ask you to forgive me. I just want you to know that I know I am in prison. I have time to think. I think about the house. I think about the turret. I think about the way the light comes through the window in the afternoon. I think about the pen. I took it because I thought it would give me power. I thought that if I had the pen, I could write my own story. I thought that if I had the pen, I could erase your words and replace them with my own. I was wrong. The story was already written. It was written in the letters. It was written in the deed. It was written in the walls. I am sorry. I will not write again. Claire Edith read the letter 3 times. She folded it. She put it in the box with the other letters. She closed the box. She put the box in the closet. She went to the kitchen. She made tea. She sat in the living room and looked at the wall. The house was quiet. She had not turned on the television in weeks. She had not answered the phone in days. She had not spoken to anyone since the trial. She sat in the living room and looked at the wall. It was winter. The snow was falling. The world was white. She thought about William. She thought about the way he sat in this room and stared at this wall. She thought about the key in his hand. She thought about the way he had looked at her on the day he died. She thought about the pen. She went to the turret. She picked up the red pen. She carried it downstairs. She walked to the front door. She opened the door. The snow was falling. The street was empty. The world was white. She stepped outside. She walked to the mailbox. She opened the mailbox. She put the red pen inside. She closed the mailbox. She went back inside. She closed the door. She walked to the living room. She sat down. She looked at the wall. She did not cry. That night, she dreamed of Claire. Claire was 7 years old. She was sitting at the kitchen table. She was drawing a picture of a house. The house was yellow. The roof was red. The door was blue. Mommy, Claire said, "Will I live in a house like this when I grow up?" "Yes," Edith said. "You will. Will you live with me?" "No, you will live alone, but you will be happy." "How do you know?" Edith looked at the picture. The crayon lines were uneven. The colors were bright. The house was crooked. "Because you drew it," Edith said. "Because you imagined it. Because you believed it." "That is enough." Claire smiled. She colored the sky. She colored it blue. Edith woke up. The room was dark. The snow was still falling. The house was quiet. She got up. She walked to the kitchen. She made coffee. She sat at the table. She looked at the chair where Claire used to sit. The chair was empty. She drank her coffee. She looked at the window. The sun was rising. She watched it. Spring came. The snow melted. The trees bloomed. The grass grew. Edith planted a garden. She planted roses. She planted peonies. She planted lavender. She dug the soil with her hands. She pulled the weeds. She watered the roots. She worked every day. She did not think about the trial. She did not think about the prison. She did not think about the letter. She thought about the garden. She thought about the way the light fell across the petals. She thought about the way the bees moved from flower to flower. She thought about the way the earth smelled after rain. She thought about the pen. It was still in the mailbox. She had not opened the mailbox since the snow. One day she opened it. The pen was there. The metal was rusted. The ink was dry. She picked it up. She carried it to the garden. She dug a hole. She buried it. She covered it with dirt. She watered the spot. She stood up. She looked at the garden. The roses were blooming. The peonies were opening. The lavender was swaying in the wind. She went inside. She made tea. She sat in the living room. She looked at the wall. The wall was bare. She had taken down the pictures. She had taken down the curtains. She had taken down the shelves. The wall was white. She looked at it. She did not see anything. She did not need to see anything. She was home. In the evening, she walked to the turret. The sun was setting. The room was orange. She sat in the reading nook. She looked out the window. The garden was below her. The roses were red. The peonies were pink. The lavender was purple. She thought about the pen. She thought about the ink. She thought about the words. She had written a story. The story had ended. The story had begun again. She did not know what the next chapter would be, but she knew it would be written, not with a pen, not with ink, with the soil, with the light, with the air. She closed her eyes. She listened to the silence. The silence was not empty. The silence was full. She found the relic the next morning. It was in the closet, behind the shelf, in the back, where the box had been. A small wooden bird, carved by hand, painted blue. William had given it to her on their wedding day. "I carved it myself," he had said. "It's a bluebird." For happiness. She had kept it for 50 years. She had forgotten it. She had lost it. She had found it again. She held it in her hand. The paint was chipped. The wood was worn. The beak was broken. She held it anyway. She carried it to the turret. She set it on the windowsill. She looked at it. She looked at the garden. She looked at the sky. She sat down. The sun was rising. The bird was blue. The room was quiet. And the story was not over.